At a narrow mountain pass between rock and sea, 300 men waited for an empire in the dark. Far below, the sea breathed in and out, slow and steady, as if none of this mattered. By morning, the world would know this place as Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. Tonight, it is only a choke point on a rough Greek road and a thin line between small Greek cities and the vast Persian Empire. This is the story of the 300 Spartans, the night they chose to die.
Years before this night, Persia had already reached for Greece and been cut.
Persian soldiers had once landed on Greek shores and marched toward Athens. On the plain of Marathon, a smaller Greek army ran straight at them, shattered their center, and drove them back to their ships. The king who ordered that invasion died. His son, Xerxes, inherited both the empire and the grudge. He planned to return to Greece, not with a raid, but with a tide that would drown resistance. People spoke of a host gathered from every corner of the empire. Archers, cavalry, infantry, engineers, sailors, servants. So many that some Greeks said it would drink rivers dry. When the Greek cities finally agreed to block the Persian advance on land, one place made sense. Thermopylae, where mountains on one side and sea on the other squeezed the road into a narrow corridor. If a great army wanted to march into central Greece, it had to pass through this gate. The Allies agreed to hold it. They needed someone to stand at the front. One city was known for its soldiers, Sparta, where boys were taken from their families, hardened by hunger and pain, trained to obey without question. Sparta had two kings. One of them was named Leonidas. He had survived the same brutal training as every other Spartan boy. He knew fear and knew how to walk toward it. When the call came to send troops to Thermopylae, the timing in Sparta was bad. A sacred festival was underway, and Spartan law said the full army did not march. Officials hesitated. Leonidas saw a different danger. If no Spartan shields appeared at the front, the rest of Greece might bend before the battle even began. So he made a choice. He would not bring the full army. He would bring an advance guard, a force strong enough to fight, symbolic enough to send a message. He chose 300 Spartans carefully, men who already had sons, whose names would not die with them if they fell. Leonidas did not march alone. Other Greek cities sent men, Thespians, Thebans, soldiers from smaller towns, who understood that if Persia crushed Greece, no village would stay safe. Together they moved north toward the Hot Gates. When they reached Thermopylae, they saw why it had been chosen. Mountains on one side, sea on the other, the road narrowed to a tight passage where numbers mattered less and discipline mattered more. They found the remains of an old wall and rebuilt it. Behind it, they formed the shape Greek soldiers knew best, the phalanx, shields overlapping, spears jutting forward in a bristling line. Soon dust and banners blurred the horizon. The Persian army had arrived. To the Persians, the stone wall and the few thousand Greeks behind it must have seemed like a small problem. Xerxes sent messengers with an order. "Lay down your arms." Leonidas answered with a short line the Greeks never forgot. "Come and take them." The attacks came in waves. Persian infantry pushed into the narrow pass, expecting weight of numbers to crush the defenders. Instead, they hit a wall of bronze. The Greeks held firm, their longer spears stabbed from behind the shield line. In that tight space, only a limited number of attackers could reach the front. The rest were trapped behind their own men. The Spartans and their allies fought in rotation. When the front line tired, they slid back, and fresh soldiers stepped forward, shields locking into place. Persian bodies fell. Some men were driven into the sea. Others were crushed against the rocks by comrades behind them, who could not see the slaughter at the front. Xerxes watched his infantry bleed against a handful of cities and 300 Spartans. He sent in more troops. He sent in better troops, an elite unit called the Immortals. They entered the pass with confidence and met the same stone throat and the same bronze wall. Again and again the Persians attacked. Again and again they were thrown back. But the pass had a secret. Above the main road, a narrow mountain path wound through the hills, known to local shepherds and hunters. One of them was named Ephialtes. His name would become another word for traitor. He came to the Persians with an offer. He could show them a way around the pass, a hidden path that would let troops come down behind the Greek line. Xerxes accepted. Under cover of darkness, Persian soldiers moved into the hills, following their guide between rocks and trees. In the Greek camp, word reached Leonidas. Scouts and allies brought the news. The enemy was moving along the mountain path. The door they had been holding shut was about to be opened from the other side. Leonidas knew what that meant. If he ordered everyone to retreat, some might escape. If they stayed, they would almost certainly die. But if they stayed, they could do one last thing, make the pass as costly as possible and buy a little more time for the rest of Greece. So he made another choice. He dismissed many of the other Greeks, telling them to leave, to fight again elsewhere, and to carry the story of what had happened. Some refused to go. The men of Thespiae, among others, chose to remain with the Spartans. The 300 did not debate. They tightened their armor and lifted their shields again. They were no longer fighting to live. They were fighting to decide how they would die. On the final day, the battle moved beyond the rebuilt wall. Leonidas led his men into a slightly wider stretch of the pass, where more Persians could reach them. If this was their last stand, they would meet it in the open. The fighting turned brutal and close. Spears shattered. Swords broke. Men used shield rims, stones from the ground, anything that could crush or cut. Persian troops pressed from the front. The soldiers who had taken the mountain path pushed in from behind. The Spartans and their allies were squeezed into a shrinking ring. Somewhere in that chaos, Leonidas fell. His death became the center of the fight. The Greeks struggled to protect his body, refusing to let their king's corpse be dragged away and displayed as a trophy. Eventually exhausted and pressed by sheer numbers, they fell back to a small rise, a hill near the pass. There, on that mound, they made their last circle. This was the moment Sparta had trained them for since childhood. Stand, do not run. When Xerxes grew tired of losing men in close fighting, he called his archers. They stepped forward, raised their bows, and aimed at the hill. At a signal, thousands of arrows rose and then fell in a dark cloud. Greek stories later said that when someone warned the Spartans that Persian arrows would be so many they would block the sun, a Spartan replied, "Then we will fight in the shade." On that last hill, there was no joke, only duty. The surviving Spartans and their allies raised their shields, or simply stood as the arrows fell. In that storm of wood and iron, the 300 finally died. Thermopylae was a defeat. The Persians broke through the pass, marched deeper into Greece, and burned parts of Athens. But the days at the hot gates had already done their work. The Greeks had watched a tiny force hold up an empire. They had seen that Persia could be resisted and delayed. Those days bought time. Time for fear and argument, and finally, time for unity. Greek fleets later trapped the Persian navy at Salamis. Armies met Persian forces again on land at Plataea. In the long chain of events, the stand at Thermopylae helped make those victories possible. Years later, on the hill where the Spartans died, the Greeks raised a simple stone. On it, they carved an epitaph. "Stranger, go tell the Spartans." that we lie here, obedient to their laws. For a Spartan, that meant we did what we were raised to do. We stood where we were told to stand. We did not run. Now the pass at Thermopylae is quiet. There is rock and sea and wind moving through the gap where men once stood shield to shield. Under the soil of that hill, their bodies have turned to dust. But their choice has not. It still whispers through history. 300 men, knowing they would not see another sunrise, chose how they would meet the night.